Welcome everyone to CNC Tips and Techniques. I'm Randy Johnson, and in tonight's session we're going to go through the design process for creating some holiday ornaments. But before we get started, I just want to mention that coming up next week will be the follow-up session in which, after we design the ornaments tonight, next week we'll be looking at setting up the tool paths, and the week after that we'll be having a session on Virtual Zero Unlimited. You can register for the live webinars or view past meetings at the web addresses shown on your screen. Today we'll be looking at the difference between starting with a bitmap using a vector import and the different kinds of vector files, as well as how to simplify the design and do some notating for each of these ornaments. Okay, when you go to a web page to download an image, and there's lots of places out there you can do this, this is one location that I often use because their use policies are very open for many of their free items. You'll see the opportunity to either download a bitmap image at various resolutions, like you see on the left side, or at the bottom there where it says vector graphics, you can also download the vector image, which is highlighted on the right side. VCarve and Aspire will accept a variety of file formats, and you can see those listed as well. Some of those formats specifically are bitmap, and some are specifically vector files. The basic difference in dealing with these files is that if you import a bitmap, think of it as a piece of clip art, a photo, a picture, is that you need to run it through the bitmap tracing process in VCarve. Having done that, you'll also likely have to do some node editing and maybe some other types of editing. As you can see in the two vector images in the middle, the bitmap tracing has a little different layout than the final one that I used for the tool pathing. However, if you download a vector graphics, the image comes in as vector lines right off the bat. However, you still often have to do some editing with some of the files, again, as you can compare these two that you see on screen before you run your tool paths. And we're going to be going over the process of both of these tonight with the different ornaments we're looking at. So with that, let's go ahead and hop into the VCarve demo. Here's the file that I've set up for creating these ornaments. And here's a selection of designs I downloaded. Along the bottom are some extra ones that I downloaded, and then here in the middle are the four that I'm actually going to work with. I decided to go ahead and download both the bitmap version as well as the vector version, partially to experiment with them, but also to show you the difference when you're working with them and what to expect and how to select which one might be best for your final design. Sometimes you only have the option for a bitmap, so you have to go with the bitmap tracing. But many times you will have the option also to download the vector file. So we'll take a look at comparing both of those. But a couple things to look inside here first. If I go into side job setup, I've set this up as a double-sided project, since that'll give me the option if I want to do a two-sided carving with any of these. Also, you'll notice my XY datum, everything is selected here, and that's because I also have multiple sheets set up, and so I'm not actually setting up the selection for the XY datum location in this window. I'll be setting that up separately in my sheets window. But I did do a left-right flip, so that we flip sides, the ornament will still remain right side up, making it easier to work with. So if I go back and close out of this window, telling me I need to recalculate, and some of the tool paths are going to cut through. At this point, I'm going to say OK on that. And here now you can see all the various sheets that I have set up. They're different sizes. These gray areas represent the material for the rest of those. And we can go inside sheets and look at that. And if I want to zoom in, I'm going to I can zoom in on this first one that I had earlier. I'm also going to turn off these others just for a minute. And so I generally have an area set up, one sheet that I call ideas or extras. It's kind of a work in progress sheet. I'll use it to keep some extra files to stay organized. And then from there, I'll go back, go on and set up the rest of my sheets more specifically. You'll notice how these sheets, one advantage of having sheets is really each one is like a separate project setup. You could have a separate size for it. As you can see, the sizes vary. You could have a separate thickness. And if we were to go inside one of these, go ahead and open this one up underneath Edit. I right-click to go and edit. You get an edit sheet, which is much like the job setup. I have a chance to say which area I want to do the Z surfacing out of, and because I originally set this up for double-sided, I'm getting the option for the two sides. I pick up my XY datum in here, and I set the actual size for the material. So each of those settings are unique for each sheet. And again, it's giving me a notice that I've got some tool paths that need to be recalculated or will cut through, and I'm okay with that for now. Okay, I'm going to turn on the pointed ornament one, and I'm going to make that active. You can also make it active either by clicking on the material out in the work area or by double clicking on the name. Turn off the ideas one because I don't need that, and we'll zoom in on this one a little bit. So I've already lined up across the top here the various stages that I go through with this one, and I have the original bitmap. I also have the bitmap tracing that I made and the vector download and my final vectors that I edited to create the toolpaths. So if your only option is a bitmap, then you'll need to use the bitmap tracing tool for that. I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of this by hitting the control button, left mouse, and hold those down while I drag a copy down here, let go of those, and that leaves me with a copy. So I'm going to work off this copy for now. Then going to go into the bitmap tracing right here. And it may come up color like this, or it may come up black and white. It will usually recognize the color and come up color. But if it comes up black and white, lots of times that's okay. In fact, for this design, I'm going to work with the black and white because I want just a simple two-color tone to work with. Zooming in, this design looks fairly crisp. I'm set right at the middle. I usually start out with everything at the middle here, or close to the middle, and make adjustments as necessary. Generally, this slider at the top for the threshold or the number of colors, if I slide this up, it'll eventually turn dark. If I slide it down, it turns white and washed out. So starting out someplace in the middle, I can also use the roller key or the roller wheel in my mouse to scroll up until the image starts to disappear, or scroll down until it starts to get washed out. So again, back to the middle someplace usually works well. So that's where I'm going to leave it. On these settings down here, I'm going to go ahead and group the vectors for now, make it easier to move them around initially. And let's click on Preview. And there you can see the vectors now are highlighted. They look good for now, so I'm going to click Apply and Close to save those. Now that I'm back to my main screen, I don't need this bitmap background anymore, so I can either drag it or I can actually delete it. Now this bitmap tracing is identical to the one I have up here, so I could work with either one of those, but I'm going to go ahead and just work right up here. And one of the first things I like to do when I compare bitmap and download vectors is look at the nodes that are in them, because that'll give me some idea of which is the cleanest. Vector downloads generally come up cleaner, as you'll see tonight. But there are a few things about bitmap tracing sometimes that are advantageous. If we wanted a simpler design here on the island at the top, you can certainly see how that is simpler than what we get with the VCarve. At the end of the day, what I ended up doing was actually custom designing it, you can see on the right. The other thing is I wanted the design to be a couple of bold stars all the way to the middle, as you can see here. And in the vector download, there's some extra lines they'll have to deal with. There's some overlaps, but that's pretty common for some vector downloads. One of the issues with the bitmap tracing is I have these extra vectors along here, some vectors in there, so they would have to be removed. But these little tree shapes or snowflake shapes right here are pretty clean. I've got more cleanup to do over here. But usually the thing that really makes the decision for me is I'll go ahead and select both of them and then go into Node Edit. They're grouped, so I need to ungroup those. And I take a look at the number of nodes. And you can see very quickly that the bitmap tracing, which is pretty common, will typically have a lot of extra nodes. And all these nodes, especially the black ones along here, they represent a straight line, not a curved line, or even a little kink. And you can see that on the stars as well. So clearly there's a lot more going on in this one. Now the download from the vector download is much cleaner. Even the stars you can see are highlighted. If we zoom in on those snowflake tree shapes, there's not a lot of nodes there. So that's good news, even though we have to do some extra cleanup. Now, if you only have the option for a bitmap download, what you can do is to select that, select all of that, try that, and go into Curve Fit Vector Tool. That will highlight all the existing vectors. Generally, Bezier curve on a shape like this is best. And then I'm going to keep some sharp corners because I want these stars to remain angular. And then we can set a little bit of a tolerance on it and preview that, and you'll notice how it simplifies it. And so that did reduce a lot of the nodes. So I'm going to say OK on that. Now we can do another comparison. Go into node editing. And it definitely simplified it, although we still have extra nodes in the overall stars. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with the vector download on this one. Like I said, that's probably going to be the most common approach you take if you do have that option. So I'll take that design, Control key, hold that down, left mouse button, drag it down. Let's center it to the middle of the work area. Zoom in on it a little bit here. And let's scale it to start with. Let's make that ornament 3.5 inches tall. We've got that lock, so it'll stretch out evenly. And that looks pretty good. Now we need to get rid of some of these extra lines on here. So let's start up here at the top. I'm going to select those vectors and just delete all of those vectors. I also want this top to be stronger because if I were to machine that, it probably wouldn't hold up. So I'm going to select that little donut shape and open up the scale window, the set size window, and I can see that it's oval rather than round. So I'm going to unlink it, and let's put a diameter in there of 0.3 for both these dimensions. Say OK on that. Then we'll just select the middle one, and in the middle one, I'm going to go 0.126, slightly over 1/8 of an inch. That way my 1/8 inch bit will easily fit in there. Say OK on that, and that looks pretty good now. Then, if we look at this up here, I need a little bit of extra shoulder along the top, so I have some strength there. So I'm going to go ahead to this vector and go into Node Edit. And I'm going to take and stretch this out just over here someplace. And then stretch this one out over here as well till it clicks to the side. Now, I'd like those to be at the same height. It'd probably be okay if I didn't, but they're not at the same height right now. So I'm going to select both those. Let's see, I'll select it like that, hold the Shift key down. And now, if I press the Y key, it'll adjust these so they're in the same height. Just like that. So the first one ends up being the anchor or the target location, and then the second selected option is what moves. Now I can take that and move that out till it snaps to the left side. And so these, oh, it drug both of them over. So let's undo that. Try it again. There we go. And, you know, we've got a little different shape on that handle. Let's just maybe pull that down just a little bit. That looks pretty similar. We could mirror this over if we wanted to, but in this size of this shape, it's not going to matter. But we do have a nice joint right there now, so I'll go in and trim that like that. Gives us our little string hole or little hook hole. And then down in the lower part here, we've got some horizontal lines here that are extra. And it looks like that's because this shape goes up and the leg of it goes over. So for that, I could go into Node Edit and click on this one and hit Delete Span. That'll get rid of that. Now it shows up again because there's one in the top half. So let's delete it again. Now we got rid of that. We'll click on this one. Delete that span as well. And then one more time. So we've got the outside shape all cleaned up now. Now we need to focus on the inside. So for that, I'm going to use the trim tool. And again, if we look at our design, we want the star on the outside to be connected to those snowflake trees. And then we've got an independent star here as well as the little flower shape in the middle. So with that in mind, I'm going to go in here and just separate these, and then these get connected like that. And then these trees or snowflake shapes just go up through the middle here, trim off those legs. Oh, took too much, so let's go Control Z. And then zoom in a little bit, and we'll trim out a little bit more right here till this all gets cleaned up. So for that, then I would continue to do that all the way around. In fact, let's just go ahead and trim out these sections on all the legs or the branches. Again, too much there. Go right there. That part and that line. And the final one up here. Now that actually frees up. I exit the trim tool. That actually frees up these legs because I don't need the rest of that leg. So I'm going to hit the delete key for these sections. It's a lot easier sometimes to use the delete key than to try and go and trim out all those little sections. So that cleans that up pretty quickly. Now the inside here, this little shape in the middle is too small to carve, so I'm going to select it all. Let's deselect that and just delete that entirely. Now I've got some half triangular shapes that make these diamond shapes. So I'm going to go in and trim out those legs or those centerpieces as well. And let's just finish this up with going down and trimming the rest of these parts off. Zoom in a little bit here. Okay, we've got the last one completed now, and I think the trimming is all done, so we can close out of that. The next thing I want to look at, just do a quick check on this to see if I have any duplicate vectors. So I'll select the whole object and go under Select, Vectors. Let's look for duplicates, and there's no duplicates. Let's also do a quick check for open vectors. And these are showing, this outside one is showing to be open. So then let's go into our join tool over here. And it's saying actually that we have 7 open vectors. And we'll have 3 closed when we're done. So let's see what happens here. Close. And then select it again. And now we have 1 closed. So it actually took care of everything. So that's an important thing to check, is to make sure the vectors are accurately closed. On this section here, it's showing we have 12 closed, which is what we want everything closed. So there's no broken vectors in there, so that's good news. And then the last thing to check for cleanup is to go inside a vector validator and to open this up, set it at VCarve, and hit search selected. And here you can see we've got a couple errors popping up. They're color coded. So if we zoom in, we've got some blue ones here, which represent zero length, and we've got some yellow ones, which are intersections. Let's take a look at the intersections, zoom in close. So that's showing me that I've got a little bit something going on right there at the bottom. So I may have to trim some stuff out on those. So let's, we'll back out of that for a minute. The zero length, however, spans. We should be able to auto fix those with this button. Now let's try it again. And all we get are intersections. It says 24 intersections at the bottom. So let's go down here. And let's go and see if we can fix that. We'll take this one right here. And sure enough, let's see what happens when we node edit it. Okay, let me try and delete that point. And I bet you that took care of it. So we might be able to just do a quick delete this extra point. So I'm holding the cursor over it, hit the D key, and it's taking care of that. This is pretty straightforward, so I'm going to go ahead and do this to every one of them. If this setup was more complicated for some reason, I might choose to correct one of them and actually then do a copy, a rotate copy, and actually do an array all the way, circular array, rather than going in and correcting all these. But that goes pretty quick. Okay, so let's exit that and let's go back one more time and do the vector validator and set that up and hit search. And it's coming up clean. So we're good for that. So this setup now is ready to go for the setup for the toolpaths. Next up, let's take a look at the next ornament on the list, which is the round ornament. So let's select that one and double click there to make that active and hide number one. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and hit save to save our work. So I have the same alignment or the same lineup here as I had in the last one. I've got the bitmap, the traced image, and the vector downloads. And the only real work I have to do on this is verify, do the same verification we did earlier with the vectors, and then again make a correction on the top of that for that little line hole or string hole. Now the bitmap gave me a pretty good setup right there, but I'm still going to edit it a little bit. But let's go ahead and take a look at these vectors, go into node edit, and again you can see how the vector download once again comes out with a cleaner array of vectors or nodes. So I'm going to just start with that. And I can take that setup right there, control left mouse, drag it down and drop it. Let's go ahead and center that. And then let's set the size. Let's link it and let's make the height on this 3.25. Here we go. And having test cut this once already, as well as with the preview, I found there was a couple of edits that I wanted to do to the these lines that are on here. But overall, there's not a lot that needs to be done to this group of vectors. The main thing is I just need to adjust this string hole. I could trim all these out and just live with what I have here, but I'm actually going to just take and delete these extra shapes right here. Like that. And then I'm going to take that donut shape. Let's make sure it's round again. Do the same size we did before, 0.3, 0.3, apply, take the middle one and make that 0.126 on both directions. And then let's take that and just take this down to the top. Now I can also use the alignment tool in that, but really not necessary. I'm just going to overlap it a little bit. And then I'm going to go to my line tool. Let's do one double check here. Let's make sure that shape is centered horizontally left to right. And it looks good. Take my line tool and I'm going to come off the side right here. Let's go, let's just kind of go right there on the edge, and then I'm just going to snap it right there. Let's trim off this bottom section. Now I'm going to take that line, go into Node Edit, and then right click again or use the shortcut key and change that to an arc. I can then stretch that arc down to a shape to create sort of a fillet in here that I like. And since this is centered on my work area, I can then go into the mirror image tool and I can image that or mirror that across the job center just like that. So it's the identical one on both sides. Then I can go in and trim out the extra lines that I don't need. And that part is all done. Now let's go and take a look at the preview up here. In this one, where the vectors come right pretty much to the edge of the side of the sphere or the circle, you can see the original vectors. There are some overlaps in a few places. I found that because of the size of this, it didn't really matter much, so I didn't go back and attempt to clean those up. I came up with a couple other solutions. But by default, if you just use the design as it's shown here, where those are really close, and on a VCarve, you'll see I got a little bit of a knife edge with a kind of a little bit of thin material in here. I don't think that generally is a problem given the size of this shape, but there are a couple options you have. One is you could just use the shape you have, or if we take that and let's just duplicate that over this direction, I can also go in and select those stripes, and I could go into the set size window and unlink it and decrease the length. Let's go down to say 2.6 on those. That might be a little bit much, although maybe the top and bottom will look pretty good. And then you could even go in if you want to just use the arrow keys and move that over a little bit like that. This one and this one and these three middle ones, I'm actually going to go back in and increase that. Let's go to 2.7. That looks better. And then this bottom one, I'm just going to tweak that over a little bit and maybe just take the size down just a tad like that. So what that'll do, that'll leave a little bit more of a rim around the edge. Let's tweak that a little bit more. Here we go. Move it around a little bit. That'll leave me a little bit more flat around the edge if you like that. That's one option for the design. The other option is we could take this and copy it. Let's copy it this way. And instead of making those shorter, we could actually take all those stripes and let's increase the length of the stripes instead. Let's take this up to say 3 inches, see how that looks. Might need to go a little bigger. Okay, again, we could customize the length of these a little bit, but what this is going to do, this will take and increase the cutting area, so it'll actually cut beyond it. So you won't have that knife edge. It'll actually be more like a dado or a groove going all the way across. So that's another option. And then, of course, would use the cutout profile toolpath around it. So you always have little ways that you could customize these to give you kind of the final design that you want. But with that, now I have multiple objects that I could cut and design depending on what your preference is. And again, the file is set up. If I go back to Sheets and Edit, it is set up for two-sided. So if I wanted to take that shape, let's cancel out of this a minute. If I wanted to take that shape, oh, look at there, we have a break. So let's solve that right now too. Select both of those, go into Design, Join, and it says we're going to have two open. We have two open. We're going to maintain two open. So there's too much of a distance, apparently, for those to join. And I'm not, let's take a closer look at that. Let's zoom in. And here's why, because we have that overlap. So it is not recognizing the close gap right there. So let's try and see if I zoom in here, if I could just trim this part off and take care of that. There, that looks like that worked. Let's go over here and trim that little string off. Close out of that. Select that. Now that looks like that solved it. Okay, let's do one more thing on, a couple more things on here. Let's take that. Let's run this through our other checks, which are select vectors open. We've already solved that problem, so we don't have any open vectors, although you notice it's showing us we have open vectors on these two. So that's the same problem we had going up here. Again, we can solve that by going in and trimming this. Let's go in over here as well. Now, the fact that I'm having to do it all three is a good example of why it's best to do your vector checks before you start doing multiple duplication. So let's try it one more time in here. In fact, let's go and check all these. And let's go into select. In fact, it's going to select pretty much anything that's on the drawing right now, but those are the ones I'm most concerned about. We did the open. Let's hit duplicates. And we have no duplicates on any of them. So let's say OK. Let's go ahead and do the vector validator on these. VCarve, select. And we have some issues on these. Now, we already know what those are. These are the overlaps, or the intersections rather, where they're intersecting like that. But if I, notice how if I take and select those and I deselect those sections, or rather, let's keep those selected, but deselect the cutout shape, because I won't be V-carving the cutout shape, but let's try it again. Notice how they go away. So since the outer circle will be cut out with a profile toolpath, not a V-carve toolpath, and it's separate, we don't have to worry about the fact that these are overlapping. So that checks out as well. So what I was going to do next is I wanted to say that if you want to do a two-sided shape, we could take this profile, and that's probably all we need. We could right-click and copy it to the other side. Now notice if I do a flip, there's the shape on the other side. So if you want to do some additional design work, do some text here or another design, or even duplicate the other design to this side, you could do that as well. So that's how you would do two-sided as far as the design part of it goes. Okay, that wraps it up for the round one. Next up, let's take a look at the snowflake. So we'll highlight that, activate that one, turn off the round. And again, so the snowflake one now, we've got a little something different going on. The bitmap came in nice and bold, which should give me a good tracing, of which I have here. I also had the vector downloads. They essentially are identical as far as they look right now. What I'm adding on the edited vectors because is this border around the outside, because my final project, I want to cut this out as some plexiglass and just engrave it so it's transparent. So I needed to add this border around the outside. So let's take and do our usual check on this. Let's select those two, do a node edit preview. And once again, if we zoom in, we can already clearly see the difference between those two. So I'm not going to spend any time with the traced one. I'm going to go straight to the vector one. Select that one. Exit node edit for a minute. And drag a copy down to the middle. Center it, and let's enlarge that. And let's link those and make that 3 inches approximately both directions. There we go. Okay, so before I go any further, I'm going to do those usual checks. Let's start out with a vector, open vectors, and there's no open vectors on our screen. So let's go back in, select vectors and duplicates. And it says we have no duplicates. So we're in good shape with those. Let's select this one next. And let's go into our vector validator and see what it says there. VCarve mode and select. Okay, we have a lot of zero length spans going on. We can see those right here, highlighted, and again there's a quick fix button right here, so when I click on that you'll notice how VCarve will automatically go in and repair those. Zero length spans are you have two nodes that are essentially laying on top of one another, and so that's causing that conflict. So by fixing it, it'll remove one of those nodes. So let's fix that, and there you can see it clicking along as it's removing those extra nodes. So with that done, we can close out of that. Now we want to add this outer boundary around it. So I'm just going to go and select the outside one. Go into my offset tool, and I'm going to use a 0.2 for the offset on this, and I'm going to go outward. I'm going to go ahead and create sharp corners to start with as a preview. I don't want to delete the original. I'm going to keep that, but I do want to select the new one. So let's see how this looks. Well, there we've got definitely sharp points all the way around, but there's something going on with this bottom one where it's truncated, so something is going on with that tip. So what I always recommend is when you're working with a project, whether it's in the vector level or the toolpath window, if something like this pops up, it's like, well, that doesn't look right. Go ahead and check it out, see what you can find going on. So let's go in, and I actually don't need this outer vector, so I'm going to delete that. But let's zoom in on this a minute. Zooming in close, it looks a little square in the end, but I can't really see what's going on. So let's take and go into node edit, and I do see two black vector. I see a black and a green vector, so I'm thinking we have, or rather nodes. I have nodes that are not totally overlapping, so that's why I didn't catch it, but it is essentially giving us a straight point. Let me grab one of those and stretch it out. I'm going to exit the snap function up here. Let's try it again here. Try to click. For some reason, it's not wanting to let me grab it. Let's try it again here. There we go. I'm just going to use my arrow key since I wasn't able to grab it. I selected. Well, there you can see right there that we have a point going on. So let's go in and let's see what happens if we delete this point. Okay, notice how it created this loop. So we've got something else still going on as well. Now, this is a handle. Maybe I could untwist it. I may have successfully untwisted it, but I still can't see the other handle. So what I'm going to do in this case, sometimes you get into situations where the zoom in just can't get in close enough to see it. But I'm going to go back to the original setup, which was right there. And I'm going to take and simply zoom in as far as I can, go over that node or that vector right there, right click, and I'm going to cut the vector And I'm going to cut the vector over here. And then that leaves me with this little section right here, which I can drag away, but really just delete it. And then I'm going to select those vector, that open area, and I'm going to use this tool right here, which is called join close by moving the two ends. So notice when I click on this, it'll join those back together into a point. And that should solve our problem. So we'll zoom back out. Let's go ahead and do the offset again. Same settings as before, just as a check. And there we have nice points all the way around. Now we don't actually want the points, so let's undo that with the Control Z, take off create sharp points, and click on that, and that gives us a nice rounded offset. So let's go with that. The last thing we need to do on this one is to add a little string or hook hole. Got the dimensions all set up, and we'll just go in and put that right there. And if I want to adjust it, that looks pretty good. So we'll just keep it right there. Just double check the size on that. Yep, that looks good. And so that completes the setup for this. So after that, we'll move to the tool paths, which we'll be looking at next week in that next session. The last one we have to look at is the star shape, which is a 3D star shape. So I've highlighted that. Now notice this, that star shape is right here. So another way to activate it, if you have, the snowflake is the active sheet right now, the star is not. If I simply double click on this star area over here, it'll automatically activate it. And I can also turn off the snowflake. Now the illustrations across the top up here include the bitmap download, which looks like a 3D shape, as you can see. It's basically illustrated to look like a 3D shape, but it's just a bitmap. And then the downloaded vectors show the shapes that were used to create that. Probably it's something like Adobe Illustrator, where they then went back and did the shading. If you do a bitmap tracing off of a shape like that, all you get is the outline, which may have some uses, but for now it really doesn't. I started looking at this to see how I could convert this, because I wanted to convert it into a 3D model. And to do that, I ended up creating this set of vectors, which are called two rail sweeps, because I have these little angular shapes, which I then called extrude along these vectors. And I did this in Aspire. I then saved it out as what's called an STL, and then brought that into this VCarve program. So let's take that design, I'm going to drag it down to the bottom here. Let's center it, and then let's scale it. And let's go 7 inches in height. Oh, that's too big. Nope, let's go 5 inches. There we go. Okay. Now, one of the things in previewing shapes, there's a little option here. If I right-click on this, let's select it first. There I can see the handles. Right-click, Appearance. This is the bitmap fading option. And so if right now I have it 0 fading, I could fade it back to almost nothing or somewhere in the middle. Again, that's probably a good option. Now it's grayed back, which allows me to have vectors overlaying it. They're easy to see. If I do select the object, then it gives me the full dark, high contrast view. So I am going to select it, and then I'm going to use this tool over here in the lower left, which again is basically a bitmap tracing tool, but what it does is it traces the component. And you'll notice when I click on that, and then let's deselect that 3D model, you can see there's the border shape around it. So again, that tracing that goes around it is essentially the same as what we would have done with the original bitmap tracing. But in this case, it follows my model nice and closely. My model has a slightly different shape than the original. Now, I also need this offset vector for doing the shape all the way for this little flat area that I want to carve into it. So for that, I'll just simply use the offset vector tool again. I'm going to use the same settings I had before, no sharp corners. Click on that, and that gives me my offset, which looks good. And once again, add in the little hole for the string here at the top. And again, you can position that whatever seems convenient or works for your particular project. And so those vectors are now set up for this carving, and we'll do the tool pathing on that again, as I mentioned, in next session. So that wraps it up for the 4 designs that we worked with. If I highlight all those at the same time, we can see them all. So those are the 4. We got 4 separate sheets, as I mentioned. We've got our design vectors all set up. And that's the basic process for doing design. This process and steps I showed you work for not just ornaments like this, but pretty much any bitmap or vector file you bring in. You want to go through those checks. You want to clean it up as best you can. And then when you get to the tool pathing, you still may have to make some changes to the vectors to get the results the way you want them. Next up, let's take a look at some of the questions that came in this session. We look over here at the chat and the list I have here. So let's see. Oh, we've got some good comments as well. For those of you who have the 10.1 pendant, Keith is mentioning here that the 10.1 pendant, like Ready to Control, has separate controls for the XY0. And that's really nice, so that if you want to zero out just one of those independently, you can do that. This can also be done in the original smaller pendant. It's just a few more steps in that pendant, and it's not as automatic. And Dave asked if we're going to do more with 3D models, and yes, we definitely are in the upcoming weeks. I'm going to do at least 1 or 2 sessions on working with 3D models in VCarve. VCarve is actually a very powerful program for doing 3D models. It not only has a lot of built-in clip art. If you haven't discovered that yet, it's over here. All kinds of shapes that can be pulled in. But you also can bring designs in from other programs, like I brought the star in tonight, and then you can work to combine them. VCarve has actually a lot of power when it comes to combining and working with it. It's almost the combination or the combining and editing capabilities are not as robust as Aspire, but the basic combination or combining tools they have for combining multiple designs is quite powerful. VCarve is very capable when it comes to setting up 3D models and creating custom designs out of existing designs. You just can't create original 3D designs within VCarve. Also, there's a question here about node editing, and for those of you who are newer to VCarve, or if you haven't done a lot of node editing, it is kind of it feels like an advanced skill, but I really do promote it as an essential skill, especially if you start getting into a lot of bitmap tracing or downloading vectors, or you want to edit something. It's a very powerful way to clean up a design. By using designs with the fewest amount of nodes, you actually also speed up your cutting files, because the cutting file looks at every one of those nodes, and sometimes it can act literally like a speed bump to kind of slow down the CNC machine. So working to have the simplest or the fewest nodes is always a good goal. Let's see what else we got here. Oh, Fred makes the comment that he used to do some design in SketchUp and really liked that. And yeah, I've used SketchUp as well. It used to be free. It no longer is, so that is one downside to it. But depending on which version you have and which, I guess they call them plugins or add-ons, you can output STLs from that directly into VCarve. VCarve actually receives SketchUp files very readily. And for 2D files like cabinet making or flat work, you can do that straight up without any special apps. VCarve will actually read a SketchUp file. And then Dave asked about some recommended tool bits. So yes, I do have a recommended set of tool bits. You can see it here. I'm going to bring it up. these are some of the basic ones that when you get started, I recommend people get into their tool set. Eventually, your quantity or your variety of sizes and diameters and lengths will increase. But this is kind of the core style group that you're going to be working with for most of the work you do. And related to that is the question adding a tool to the tool database. So let's take a look at the tool database for a minute. Open it up. Now, this is my basic setup. I have my basic groups, and I've customized this, and that's one of the neat things about the tool database. You can customize it to fit just the bits you have, which is usually what I do. You can add in large sets of bits that you can download from the websites like Amana or Vortex or Whiteside or Freud. They do publish these large tool sets with every bit they make. And those can have some use, but I find it adds a lot of extra bits here that I don't have and don't need. The other thing is that the default settings that come with most of those bits are made for larger commercial machines. And they really are many times too aggressive for the Sharp tool. So I would always go back in and double check those settings to make sure they're not too aggressive. If you're looking for some of those settings, you can also find some of those settings available out on the Next Wave website on the webinar page that you see here. I've created a series of VCarve classes, and the tool class that I teach on there, you'll see some recommendations within that on the recommended tool sets or the recommended settings that you want to use within your tool database. So that wraps it up for tonight. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time.